Hi, everybody. Welcome to Vintage Books Live. Tonight, I'm really excited to have Erin Hourigan. She is the author of the picture book In the Blue that we have in the store right now that we're really excited about being able to talk to her about because it was one of our picture books of the week and we really love it. So we're welcome and thanks for stopping by.
Hi, thank you.
Do you by any chance have a copy of the book nearby you?
Yes, I do.
Yay. Okay, good. Because since I'm at home on Monday evenings, I don't have the books with me. So that'll be great. So I'm just going to start out by saying, In the Blue is a fairly, not entirely unique, but not a super common topic in that it addresses a child living with a parent with a mental illness, in this case, depression. And I'm curious about the journey that you took to get to this particular book.
So it started in a very different way. I was writing a story about a girl and her dad, but it was more just about the dad being very tall. My dad is very tall, he's 6'6". So I think I was kind of playing with that idea because of that. And something about just it wasn't really going anywhere. And so I started trying to make it a little more personal. And at the time, had gone through some things in life that were, I was going through my own depression as well. So decided to make it more about that. And so it really became more of a project about more personalized story of growing up with my dad versus just he's tall.
Yeah.
That's a thing. One of the phrases I wrote when I was doing that first iteration with a giant dad was something about his heart being so big, he felt everything big. And something about that really rang true moving forward as well, where I started thinking about it from really big feelings. And that sort of moved me more towards talking about depression and the impact that has on each individual and as a family as a whole.
Yeah. You are the writer and illustrator of this picture book. And for those who aren't aware, that is not, it happens quite a bit, but it's not necessarily the default. Like not everybody gets to do that. And sometimes people will write a book, but they will hire another illustrator. So it's always fun when they end up using the writer and the illustrator as the same person. And I was curious, like you told a little journey about how the book went from one thing you thought it was going to be into another thing you thought it was going to be. And I was curious, like if you're, as you're doing both, as you're because in picture books, the pictures and the words are so integral to each other. Like you can't really have one without the other. And I was curious, like, how do you approach it as a writer illustrator? Like, do the words come first? Do the images come first? Do they kind of come like one after, like one and then the other and one and then the other? Or how does that work for you?
For me, I mean, I know for everyone it's a little different, but for me, most of the time I have a story in mind, but that comes from some sort of image, whether that's just an idea that pops in my head or if it's from something I see when I'm out in the world. So it starts with that, but then it very much becomes about writing first. So I write out the entire manuscript and get it to a point where I feel like it's pretty tight. Always leave room for edits because that's just going to happen.
Yeah.
But get it to a place where I feel like I can break it down into the pages that I'd like to see. And then from there, I move to the art. And then it becomes a little more fluid back and forth at that point because there's a lot of times where I'll draw an image and realize I don't need as many words or maybe any words, depending on how strong that image is in its storytelling. So it kind of goes back and forth from there, but it usually starts primarily with writing and then the images come after.
Okay. Yeah. But it sounds like maybe you have a little bit of an image in your head, like an inspirational image in your head at the beginning.
Yeah. which this one, I had this idea of the little girl looking up at her dad. And then that was kind of it. I didn't really have any idea how I do it. So this was actually kind of challenging when I was trying to decide how I was going to illustrate this because it is such a heavy topic. And up until that point, my illustrations are not necessarily hyper realistic, but they tend to stay within like more naturalistic colors and things like that. But I came up with the idea of wanting to incorporate storm clouds and sunshine and yellow and blue and all these colors. And so that was really challenging to think how I was going to work that into these images. So then I went back to that image of the little girl looking up at her dad and started to incorporate the color and think about how I wanted that to look throughout the entire book and how that might change.
Can you show the book for a minute now and just like grab a couple pages and show people? Because I think
Sure.
that, and that actually was one of the questions that I was going to ask, is talking a little bit about the decisions that you made about the use of color in the book, because I honestly think that those decisions are part of what makes this particular book so exceptional, and why we got so excited about it was like it's an amazing examination of a topic that's really hard to talk about. But the other thing that is so amazing about it is that how evocative, like how the color tells its own story throughout the book. And I'll let you show a couple of pages to kind of help people understand what I'm talking about. So that's the beautiful cover.
So that first image stayed similar to what I was first thinking.
That's so great.
But we ended up incorporating more yellow because that ended up being, we wanted that to be where it starts. Here's where we have the blue starting to come in. And then other emotions, got the anger and the starting to understand the different emotions.
Yeah. Because I think in the middle, when the blue is really deep, like it's pretty much the whole picture. And then because it starts with the like more of the yellow, and then it kind of goes down into where it's so much blue. And then, when they're starting to get help. Yeah. And the fact that he's totally in the blue, but the mom and the girl are a little bit yellow. I mean, there's just so much subtlety in how you dealt with that. I really loved that.
Oh, thank you.
I can't read my writing. So you kind of already answered that question that I had, was how did the idea develop to use color that way? And was that something that you came up with, or was that something like you worked with an editor to come up with? Like, how did that initially happen?
It was mostly my own work on that. So my agent had read the manuscript and really liked it, so it was encouraging me to take that to color. And that's when I started playing around with this idea of maybe having clouds or yellows and blues, and how would I make this where I can show that the characters are feeling those colors. And then I started doing more expressive type paintings where I was filling in the entire background with the yellows and blues. And that kind of started the idea of then having the characters overlaid on top. So what we submitted to the publisher was actually a full illustration with colorful outlines of the characters, and that felt like finished enough to me. But the publisher, the editor I worked with, as well as my art director, wanted to see me kind of flesh it out a little bit more. And then they had me start incorporating a few more colors into the drawings themselves. And that sort of took it to a whole other level. And I'm really, really happy that they put so much time and input into it.
That's one of the things that I just think is so cool about publishing, that I think somebody on the outside doesn't always see, is that, yes, it's your words and your idea and your pictures and stuff, but the input from all these people helps make it what it is at the end, and it really ends up being a team effort. But most
Yeah.
of the team is kind of like in the background, nobody sees them. So it's fun
Yeah.
to see. How did you, I'm going to go back to an earlier thing that I was going to ask. What did you have to think about when you're trying to strike a balance between, this is a picture book, who and when we think of picture books for the audience, like that tends to be preschool to maybe early elementary school. So, kids that don't have a lot of words for these abstract concepts. And so I'm curious, what was your thought process and what decisions did you make as along the way as you're deciding, like, how do I balance the heaviness of what's really going on with the fact that, it's a kid's book and you don't want to drag it down to the point where it's, so depressing. The kid doesn't want to read it, or like, that's another thing that I noticed is that the use of color actually keeps there's a lot of whimsy in the pictures still. And so I was curious how that thought process is going on in your mind as you're working your way through the manuscript.
Yeah, I mean, that was always something I was actually really self-conscious about when I was developing this book. I remember taking it to workshops and stuff and sitting at the table, and the first time everyone read it, I could tell that it had a very big impact on them. But I also was just like, yeah, it's about depression. Like it was always this, I was very
Yeah.
nervous to bring it up because it felt like such a counterintuitive idea for a children's book. But at the same time, I'm having conversations with, I believe he was 4 at the time I signed the contract, my nephew, and he has such a good grasp on some of these
Yeah.
big concepts, but like you said, he doesn't have the words. But he's a very emotive and emotionally intelligent person. So he has very big emotions like I did as a child. And I think that kids are often much more aware of these things than we may give them credit for. So having a picture book that, I don't ever say in the book the word depression until I'm explaining, in the author's note what the
Yes.
story is
Yeah.
about. So I think that kids can come to this story and see some of these big emotions and the conflict that happens. And a lot of kids are going to relate to it on some kind of level, whether it's something they've seen someone else experience or that they've experienced themselves. So I think that was what kind of kept pushing me forward, was I wanted that book as a kid. I wanted to see these things that I felt and I saw. And so I know that I'm not alone in that experience, and that kids are still experiencing that now, and want to see themselves and see even difficult subjects out there. That's a little bit of comfort to know you're not alone. So
Are you seeing that, like, I know we're starting to see some stuff in the bookstore too, but I'm curious what you're seeing on your end. Are you seeing more books like this? Did you have a hard time selling it because of the topic, or was it more acceptable, do you think, nowadays to be approaching those topics?
yeah, so this sold in 2018, no, 2019, 2018.
Yeah.
Oh man, I can't remember.
Yeah.
But pre-pandemic, so although mental health was in the zeitgeist, it wasn't quite as heavily talked about as it is now. So it definitely felt like it was going to be a hard sell. But when my agent sent it out, there was a lot of really positive feedback. And the editor that I did end up with at Little Brown, she immediately emailed back, I want this book. So it was sort of that magic of it ended up in the right hands at the right time. I think that now, actually, oddly enough, it would have a harder time selling in the market if I were to try and sell this book to a publisher now, because of what we've just been through as a society in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people processing that, and as artists, we put that into our work. So there are a lot more projects coming out, and some of them are really, really powerful and incredible. So I feel very fortunate that I'm out there too. So
We just had somebody pop in. I just want to let them know that we are recording. So I was going to let's see. I was going to say, and I think you answered this a little bit earlier, is when you imagine this book finding its way out in the world, like how do you hope, what do you hope it does for families and kids?
my hope is that it's a conversation starter, that it's something that parents, teachers, caretakers can read with their children and talk about some of these things that maybe they don't know how to define in a kid-friendly way, or just open up the forum for them to start asking questions about some things that maybe they don't understand, and that it'll just be a starting point for them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like I said before, I am hoping that it'll be something that kids who are a part of families where there are some big emotions and heavy topics, whether it's depression or something else going on, that they see that book and know that they're not alone in that, that there's other kids in that
Yeah.
same situation.
Yeah, I think books have helping us not feel alone is one of the most powerful things that books do. So that's
Yeah.
very cool. And let's see, where did I write? Oh, I was going to ask you, like, when you started working in picture books, what picture books were inspiring to you, or that you love and you keep around just kind of as inspiration? Or
Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, I was all about Chris Van Allsburg and John Sheska. I didn't end up being able to write humor very well at all, but I do love a good funny book. I love Jory John, and Mac Barnett is one of my absolute favorite authors to read. And I'm in the SCBWI, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. So there's a lot of people that when I've seen them speak, I get really into them. John Clausen's one of those that he came and talked about how he laid out I Want My Hat Back, and it just was mind blowing to listen to him talk about how organized he was and how thoughtful about every single decision in making that book. Oliver Jeffers is a big one that I love listening to, his process and how he gets into things. And there's a really great group of authors and illustrators in Portland that they're all like around my age, older, younger. It's a whole spectrum of us, but I look up to a lot of them for just how naturally sometimes it seems like they come up with these things, but knowing, like having seen them work for years towards it, how much work.
Yeah, that's very cool. And the last question I was gonna ask you, and I was going to put out there that people can ask questions if they want to. The last question I was gonna ask is, do you have any projects, other projects, new projects that you're working on that are coming out that you're allowed to talk about?
Well, my other book that I have illustrated, I am not the author. The author is Amy Bissonette, but it's with Sasquatch Books or Little Bigfoot. So that one's called When Winter Comes. So that one's out, but we are now going to be doing all the seasons. So I'm working on all the Pacific Northwest outdoorsy
What's
landscape.
The name of the author again?
Amy Bissonette. So very French spelling, Aimee, and then Bissonette. So even though it's 98 degrees out today, I am working on autumn cozy images.
That is cool. Yay. All right. And I'm going to open up for questions. If anybody has any, you are welcome to turn your camera on if you want to. I just turned them off while we're in the main part of the interview, but you're welcome to turn it back on. And I was trying to think if there was anything else while we're waiting to see. You can type them in the chat or you can pop in and ask, but now my head went blank and I totally forgot what I was going to say. So, but do you have a favorite spread in the book? Like a favorite image that you know, out of all the images, like which one you like the very best?
I have a few. Let me see. This one's one of my favorites.
Oh, that's very cool. Yay.
And I love the therapist page.
Yeah.
The rainbows. And I gave her like rainbow shadows and stuff. I just had so much fun on that.
That's very cool.
Page.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I don't see any questions, so I think that we are done. And so I really thank you for talking with us. And just to let everybody know, this will go up on our Vintage Books YouTube page, and that you can get In the Blue in the store right now. If you would like it, you can order it online or you can come into the store. So thanks so much for being with us, Erin. It was really fun.
Thanks for having me. That was great.
Good night.
Bye.